All right, guys, if you are watching this, you should have already taken the unemployment quiz from last week on the terms that we discussed and the formulas. And we're going to start out today. Take good notes because you won't be taking the test on this until the week of the 11th. That'll be the main thing that I'll have you doing the week of the 11th. I know that that's a week with several AP exams going on. And so I've given you a little less to do this week. But that last test will be pretty important. And so let's get into our new information on labor and unemployment. Okay, one statistic or a formula that might be helpful to us that we didn't learn last week is this one called the labor force participation rate. And this is really what we're talking about in the article that I gave you, Where Have All the Men Gone, that we're going to discuss this Wednesday. And the labor force participation rate is really just a way of saying, okay, well, how many people in the United States are actually working or looking for work? In other words, how do we subtract all of those people who aren't in the labor force? So what you do here, you can see, is you take your labor force and you divide it by the total adult population. So that does take out, right, the babies and the children. Now, just so you know, interestingly enough, this by adult population here, it's not talking about 21s and over or 18s and over. It's talking about 16s and over. And so you might not normally think of a 16-year-old as an adult, but economists do, because enough of them are working part-time, okay, that you do want them in the labor force participation rate. And so it kind of balances out by picking 16, because you might have some 14 or 15-year-olds that, you know, are working, but we're only going to count those who are 16 and above as part of the labor force participation rate in the United States. And so, of course, this is, again, going to be a rate. And so I wanted to show you a couple of graphs from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And I don't ever consider myself a statistician or necessarily even a big numbers person. But when I spent some time on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics website looking at these particular stats and looking at all that they collect, you have to say that it's pretty neat, and it's pretty interesting that there's this much information and data being collected. This is just 3 graphs to show you what the labor force participation rate has been historically. And like I said, this week we're going to be discussing that article about the labor force participation rate for men. Now, the truth is that for able-bodied men, ages 25 to 54. So we're not even talking about full-time students, okay? We're not talking about early retirees. This is a very, very solid number. Between the ages of 25 and 54 have always been men's primary earning years, okay? Men particularly. That is not necessarily the same for women who have a lot of childbearing years during that time. But for men, ages 25 to 54, able-bodied, that's been their prime earning time. And yet, the labor force participation rate amongst men in that category has declined every year since 1960. That's a pretty significant fact. So we're going to look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics numbers as reported by the St. Louis Fed here. I used their graphs, but if you get any time to go look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and just click through some things, it's pretty neat. So let's look at this. Here's the labor force participation rate amongst men. And you can see here, this one goes back to, this graph's a little light, I think it goes back to 1950. It goes all the way back to 1950 when almost 87.5%, right around there, were in the labor force. Okay. And then you see the decline, right? You see the decline over time, and then where it is today in 2020. Now, remember, this graph is covering enough years where it's not really showing us anything of the current financial crisis, okay? This is well before the financial crisis. This is a trend amongst the labor force participation rate. So this isn't talking about unemployment, all right? This is talking about whether or not these men are looking for work. And so that number has dropped by about 20 points since 1950. That's pretty significant. And you can see that it's a pretty steady decline as well. Now, we'll talk more about this on Wednesday and some of the possible reasons for it. I want to show you the labor force participation rate for women for that same time. Here's the labor force participation rate for women. So from 1950, when a lot of women did not work outside the home, remember that this graph still includes the fact that a lot of women do stay at home with their children. And so it's only going up to 65. It's not going up to 87.5 like the men's graph is, but still you see a pretty steady increase, a little bit of leveling out in the 2000s, right? But you see a pretty steady increase in the number of women who are participating in the labor force. And so in March of 2020, 57.3%. That's a very big increase from where it was in 1950. Okay, and then what about teenagers? What about people 16 to 19? I thought you might want to see those numbers just because those are kind of relevant numbers to you. So I think you'll be surprised here. Here, since 1950, is the labor force participation rate for those ages 16 to 19. So we can pretty fairly assume that a lot of these jobs would be part-time jobs, entry-level jobs. And so what you see here is that there's been a sharp decline in the labor force participation rate. In other words, not just kids working, but kids who want to and are looking for work in the 2000s, especially 2010 and forward. A very sharp dip after 2000. So what accounts for the large dip in the number of 16 to 19-year-olds participating in the labor force? What has happened nationally to discourage or to stop 16 to 19-year-olds from working? Do you think this is do you think this is competition? They're being locked out of the market? Because that doesn't really, the labor force also includes people who are actively looking for jobs. Do you think it's the professionalism of children, the professionalization of children, the idea that moms and dads discourage children from finding work at that age because they say school is your work, or your sports are your work, or you're going to get somewhere in life by these other experiences that we want you in? Is this because of the high cost of college? Is this because even if 16 to 19-year-olds get a job, that's not going to help them ever pay for college at its present rate? And so what parents are doing instead is saying to their children, forego working and instead work toward getting a sports scholarship, an academic scholarship, a community scholarship, something like that. And so there's a lot of pressure on these 16 and 19-year-olds not to work at a grocery store or a paper route or, a auto shop or a retail store, but instead to go for the big bucks, right? Because we know situations where students who are given $20,000 and even $30,000 scholarships have to turn down those schools because they can't afford to go to pay the rest of what the college wants to charge per semester. So this is an interesting question that we could look a little bit further into. We're going to keep going for now, but I hope that you can appreciate those participation rate changes over time. All right, so now we're going to talk about the types of employment, okay? And we're going to do this rather quickly so that you can get on with your day and the other things that you need to do. Types of unemployment, all right? The natural rate of unemployment is the rate that we would say is usually steady, all right? And the unemployment rate fluctuates in and around this rate. So the blue line here, all right, is your, I don't want to use another, I'm just going to get some black here, okay. The blue line here, all right, is your, oh, so much for that, it's not black, it's yellow, is your natural rate of unemployment, natural unemployment rate. Cyclical unemployment is the red, right, the deviation, okay, the deviation around the natural unemployment rate. So we might say America has a natural unemployment around 5%, but cyclical unemployment has gone above and below that rate for all kinds of different reasons and all kinds of different realities. So in this, you see a climb in the 2008 recession. You see a climb in a short time in the 1980s during Reagan's presidency when he was trying to fix some of the systemic problems in the economy. And then you see the unemployment rate dip, right? You see it at some of its lowest points in 2000 and some of its highest points in 2008 and 10. And so you can see that there's times when the cyclical unemployment rate deviates quite a bit from unemployment, but it's always coming back, right, somewhere around that natural rate of unemployment, which has been about 5%. And we know that in February of 2020, as we've said many times now, the unemployment rate was 3.5, and that was quite low. We had a very hot economy, and there had been steady job growth for an amazing amount of months. I've got a really good Wall Street Journal article that I'm going to put up for you guys to read. This is going to talk about the unemployment numbers that are going to be released for the month of April. That were just released, for the month of April. And they're expecting that these are going to show the highest unemployment numbers ever recorded in U.S. history. And so I want you to read that article. I mean, it is not only an interesting article, a sad article, but it's a perfect article for the terms and definitions that we've been talking about last week and then again continuing into this week. So hopefully you've got down natural and cyclical unemployment, and we're going to move on. Another type of unemployment you just need to think about is that, sometimes you think, well, unemployed people are people that, maybe you think, well, they could find a job if they wanted to, or they shouldn't be unemployed. Well, think about who belongs in the category of unemployment. It also includes people who are recent entrants to the labor force, but they just didn't find jobs. They could be in the labor force for one day and be unemployed. So this is young people looking for their first job. Maybe they're out of high school and it's the first day out of high school when they can go and look for a job, but they haven't found one yet. All recent college grads that have left college and are now looking for their first jobs are unemployed. And then sometimes we have a group of older people who left the workforce at one point but are now re-entering the workforce. Maybe they retired, but after they came into their retirement, they found that, oh, you know what, I really don't want to do this. We just hired a person that had retired from a long career up north in education, but as soon as they came down and moved to Florida, they decided that they still wanted to continue teaching. They had retired very young, and so they re-entered the job market. At points along the way, all of those people are unemployed. So that's just something to think about. And the amount of time you spend unemployed is also an important thing to think about. And we're going to get to that. Okay, there's another type of unemployment that doesn't really get figured into the statistics, and this is called discouraged workers. Now go way back to your definition of unemployed. If you remember right, the unemployed definition said people who want to work and are looking for work over the last 4 weeks. And that's an interesting definition, people who want to work. Well, these discouraged workers are not really a super official statistic, okay? But they're kind of in this no man's land between labor force dropouts and the unemployed, okay, who have not dropped out of the labor force. And they're called discouraged workers because they say that they would like to work, but for all intents and purposes, they have given up the job search. So you say, well, shouldn't they be included in the labor dropout rate? Well, maybe, but they're telling people that they're unemployed and looking for work. But the truth is they're kind of giving up on that job search. So they might be saying, oh, yeah, I'm looking for a job. But they're in this status called discouraged workers, where for one reason or another, they're probably not, or they're not very active in their job search, or it's been more than 4 weeks. And so we note them as economists just as a special category so that we can kind of say, all right, so all these people who are right in this picture sitting here for interviews and prepping and waiting, and they're actively in the job force. They're not working, they're unemployed, but they're still in the labor force. This guy is getting up and saying, you know what, maybe I've had enough of this, right? A discouraged worker. And maybe this discouraged worker is going to eventually be in the labor dropout, okay? Or maybe he's going to find a job and become employed. Maybe he's going to go back into active unemployment and be submitting job applications regularly. But a discouraged worker is something important to note so that you can know that term of art and understand what people are talking about when you hear a discouraged worker, okay? All right, now let's talk about another type of unemployment, frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is anytime someone leaves one job and goes to another, right? Whenever a person is saying, well, this job isn't exactly meeting my tastes, my skills, my salary requirements, and they leave that job and go to another job, we have frictional unemployment. Now, before we get too critical, okay, and we say like, oh, I can't believe, someone's looking for a job that better suits their tastes and now they're unemployed. Frictional unemployment is generally a very short-term situation. Now, listen, if a person has an advanced biochem degree, okay, right now, you really don't want them working as a Starbucks barista, okay? Because their skill set and their abilities are better matched to a higher paying job. Why do you care and I care if their skill set is matched to a better paying job? Well, first of all, there's a number of reasons. If they went into any kind of student debt to get that degree, we want them to be able to pay it back and not default on their student loans or on other loans that they have. Second of all, if they have a better paying job, they will contribute automatically more to tax revenue in the United States. And so more money goes into the pot and makes America better off. Thirdly, a biochem engineer, okay, is going to contribute more to the money that they have in a bank, to the money that they invest, much more than a person who's getting a Starbucks barista salary. That doesn't mean that there's not honor in working in a coffee shop. We're just talking about the match of skills to job ability, all right? And then also, this person, we think, could contribute perhaps to something specific, like maybe right now a biochemical engineer could be working on coronavirus vaccines or realities that have to do with very pressing problems in our culture. And so we want people to find the right kind of job. And when that person who we would call overqualified for that barista job leaves it, that means an entry-level skill worker, okay, somebody in that 16 to 19 category or someone without those skills can get that job, and they're not locked out of a job because the person isn't really matched. So frictional unemployment is not always a bad thing, and it is mostly always short term. Okay, if someone's just saying, oh, I really haven't found anything that matches my passions, so I'm still looking, but they're not actually looking, they just like to make that speech, they're not in labor force. Okay, that's not frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is leaving one employment and looking for another. And, your text, ManQ, he does a really good job of talking about the time that people are usually unemployed. And he makes this statement, I want to read it to you. He says, most spells of unemployment are short, and most unemployment at any given time is long term. And so that seems like a contradiction in terms. And so he says, what are we supposed to call unemployment? Is unemployment usually a short-term thing? And this isn't frictional, okay? This is all unemployment. Are people who are unemployed usually in a short-term situation, or are they in a long-term situation? Listen to these statistics. I thought they were very good. Simple calculations help answer this question. In this example, you meet a total of 55 unemployed people. 52 of them are unemployed for 1 week, but 3 are unemployed for a full year. That means that 95% of unemployment spells end in 1 week. Yet, whenever you walk into the unemployment office, 3 of the 4 people you will meet will be those unemployed for the entire year. So while 95% of unemployment spells end in 1 week, 75% of unemployment is attributable to those individuals who are unemployed for a full year. So the correct answer to that question about how long are people unemployed is most unemployed people are employed for a very short time. But once you all get past that short time, people can tend to be unemployed for a long time. And some of this has to do with unemployment benefits, which we're going to be talking a lot about as we get into next week before our test on the end of that week, okay? All right, let's keep going. This is the really bad one, okay? Structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is the one that you don't want, okay? And it is when the number of jobs in the market simply doesn't meet people looking for one. People want to work. We're assuming the skills to work. They have the ability to work, the desire to work. They're free. They're not employed in other areas, and they want a job. But structurally, the economy cannot provide that job. You do not want structural unemployment. You do want a little bit of frictional unemployment because it means that people are finding the jobs that work best for them. The natural rate of unemployment isn't something to freak out about, okay? I think the labor force participation rate issues are something a little more to freak out about, actually. But the structural unemployment indicates that there's some kind of problem in the economy. And so we don't want a structural unemployment situation. What's wrong? In an economy, why is structural unemployment happening? This little word cloud or whatever you want to call it gives some ideas as to why it might be, right? It's things that come up in a search or things that economists might offer. But ManQ wants to remind us, as Sol did, of our old friends. They say if you really want to know why there's structural unemployment and you want to go for the most reliable things, you've got to revisit our old friends. Are you ready to revisit our old friends? You're probably tired of hearing about them. They are minimum wage laws, unions, and efficiency wages. This is all the stuff that we talked about when we talked about labor factor markets. But I want you to revisit these things in terms of unemployment. All right. And so when we say there's structurally something wrong and people cannot find jobs and there's not enough jobs to meet the number of laborers that we have in the United States, right? Why is that? I want you to look at the topics of unemployment insurance that starts on page 626, and I want you to read to 635, and you're going to talk about unemployment insurance, minimum wage laws, unions, and then a revisit, and he does a good job, a revisit of the theory of efficiency wages when employers pay workers more than they have to in the marketplace. And he revisits that from an unemployment standpoint and asks whether or not that's a good thing. So we're going to conclude this by having you read that section up through 635 and revisiting our old friends of what we call above equilibrium wages, right? And above equilibrium wages can cause structural unemployment if they're widely enough happening in an economy. And that is not a good thing. All right, guys, see you soon.